Ezekiel saw machines, military-grade technology hovering over Babylon in 593 BC, piloted by beings that made him fall flat on his face in terror. Stay with me until the end, because what NASA engineers discovered when they analyzed his testimony will change everything you thought you knew about Scripture. Let me take you back to the Kebar River. The year is 593 BC. Ezekiel is 30 years old, a Hebrew priest living in exile among 10,000 deportees from Jerusalem. The Babylonian Empire has torn his world apart. His people are slaves. His temple is ashes. His God is silent. Or so he thought. Picture Ezekiel on the riverbank that summer afternoon. The sun is setting over the canals. He's probably praying, probably begging for some sign that his people haven't been abandoned. The other exiles are settling in for another night of captivity. Same hopelessness, same questions with no answers. Then the sky tears open. Not metaphorically, Ezekiel describes it like a wound splitting the atmosphere. A storm materializes out of nowhere, moving against the wind. Lightning arcs between clouds that shouldn't exist in summer. And inside that impossible storm, something is coming toward him. 4 objects. He calls them living creatures because he has no other words for what he's seeing. But read his description carefully. These things are symmetrical, mechanical, precise. Each one has 4 faces arranged in cardinal directions: human forward, lion right, ox left, eagle back. Perfect geometric configuration. Their bodies gleam like burnished bronze, catching the light from something inside them. They move in formation without turning, each one straight ahead, synchronized, coordinated, like they're receiving instructions from a central command. And they're wheels. Ezekiel loses his mind trying to describe the wheels. He mentions them 9 times in the first chapter because nothing in his world explains what he's seeing. Wheels within wheels, rims full of eyes all around. They hover above the ground. They move in any direction instantly without pivoting. When the creatures go up, the wheels go up. When the creatures stop, the wheels stop. The wheels are connected to the creatures. He's specific about this. The spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. That's not poetry. That's a priest trying to explain integrated navigation systems. But here's where it gets terrifying for Ezekiel. Above these 4 objects is a platform, transparent, crystalline, stretched over their heads like an expanse. And on that platform is a throne. Someone is sitting on the throne. Ezekiel sees fire, amber light, colors that pulse and shift. The figure has a human shape, but radiates so much energy that Ezekiel can barely look at it. The heat is intense. The sound is deafening, like the roar of rushing waters or an army on the march. And then the figure speaks. Son of man, stand up. Ezekiel is on his face in the dirt, probably convinced he's about to die. But the voice pulls him to his feet, not by his own power. He says, "The Spirit entered into me and set me on my feet." Something lifts him up against his will. The being gives him a mission: go back to the exiles. Tell them their rebellion ends now. Tell them I haven't abandoned them. Tell them judgment is coming, but so is restoration. Then it shows him something. A scroll appears, floating in the air. It unrolls on both sides, covered in words. Lamentations, mourning, woe. The being tells him to eat it. Eat the scroll. Ezekiel obeys. He says it tastes like honey in his mouth, but turns bitter in his stomach. He's ingesting information, literally consuming a message he has to deliver, even though it's going to destroy him to speak it. Then the entire structure lifts off. The wheels spin, the wings beat with a sound like thunder. The whole craft rises into the air with Ezekiel watching from the ground. He says the glory of the Lord was departing, but that's his theology trying to process what his eyes are seeing. What he saw was technology. If you're feeling that crawl up your spine right now, subscribe to this channel, because this story is just beginning, and what NASA discovered when they studied Ezekiel's account is going to shake your faith in ways you never expected. Now here's what the church doesn't want you to ask. Why does an infinite, omnipresent God need a vehicle? Think about it. If God is everywhere at once, why does he arrive in something with wheels, wings, and a navigational system? Why does the glory of the Lord need a platform to stand on? Why does an all-powerful deity travel with an entourage of 4 identical crafts in tight formation? Unless what Ezekiel saw wasn't God. Unless what he saw was someone claiming to be God. In 1971, NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich was assigned to debunk Erich von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods. Von Daniken argued that ancient religious texts described extraterrestrial contact. Blumrich thought it was garbage. He was going to prove it scientifically. He started with Ezekiel. Blumrich pulled out his engineering notebooks and began reverse engineering the prophet's description. He treated it like a technical document, stripping away the religious language to analyze the mechanics underneath. What he found made him rewrite his entire analysis. The 4 living creatures matched the configuration of a spacecraft with 4 landing pods. The faces were sensors arranged for 360-degree awareness. The wings that covered their bodies were retractable heat shields. The wheels within wheels were gyroscopic systems that allowed omnidirectional movement without changing orientation. Blumrich didn't just debunk von Daniken. He designed a functional spacecraft based on Ezekiel's specifications and filed a patent for it. U.S. Patent 378947, omnidirectional wheel. NASA built the wheel. It works. But here's the part that should terrify you. Blumrich calculated the energy output needed to power what Ezekiel described. The amber glow, the fire, the sound like rushing waters. He estimated it would require a small nuclear reactor or an equivalent fusion system. Ezekiel saw something radioactive, and he got close enough to eat from its hand. The church will tell you this is blasphemy, that you're reading the text wrong, that ancient people used symbolic language and you can't take it literally. But Ezekiel wasn't writing poetry. He was filing a testimony. He gives measurements, dimensions, mechanical details. He describes the same craft 3 more times in his book, and every time he adds more technical specifications. In chapter 10, he sees the wheels again. This time he counts the eyes in the rims. He watches the cherubim take burning coals from between the wheels and carry them into Jerusalem. Fire from the craft, transferred by hand, used as a weapon. That's not metaphor, that's mission protocol. Here's what keeps me up at night. Ezekiel's vision didn't happen in a vacuum. Look at the other prophets. Look at what they saw. Isaiah sees the Lord sitting on a throne, surrounded by seraphim with 6 wings. But he also describes the hem of God's robe filling the entire temple. How does a robe have volume unless it's describing something physical? Isaiah says the doorposts shook and the house filled with smoke. That's not worship, that's engine exhaust. Daniel sees the Ancient of Days on a throne with wheels of burning fire. 10,000 attend him. A stream of fire flows from his presence. The books are opened. Judgment is rendered. Wheels, fire, attendance, same pattern. Elijah gets picked up by a whirlwind. Except it's not just wind. There's a chariot of fire and horses of fire separating him from Elisha. Elijah goes up by a whirlwind into heaven. His cloak falls back to earth. You don't leave your clothes behind if you're having a spiritual experience. You leave them behind if you're physically removed from the planet. The angels pass through the years. Ezekiel becomes a celebrity among the exiles, but not for the reasons you'd think. He does exactly what the being commanded. He acts out the siege of Jerusalem using a clay tablet and an iron griddle. He lies on his left side for 390 days, then his right side for 40 days. He shaves his head and divides the hair into thirds, burning one portion, striking one portion with a sword, scattering one portion to the wind. The exiles think he's insane. They gather to watch him like he's a street performance. They whisper that the stress of captivity broke him. But every prophecy comes true. Jerusalem falls in 586 BC, exactly as Ezekiel predicted. The temple burns, the walls are demolished. The survivors are marched to Babylon in chains. And suddenly, the exiles aren't laughing anymore. Ezekiel keeps seeing the craft. 6 more times over the next 20 years. Sometimes it appears in visions, sometimes it appears physically. Each time, the being gives him more information. Floor plans for a future temple, laws for a restored nation, dimensions for altars and gates and courtyards. Why would God need blueprints? Why would an omniscient being need to show you measurements and specifications? Unless the being itself is working from plans. Unless the being is executing a design that wasn't its own. In chapter 40, Ezekiel is transported to Israel in a vision. A man appears beside him, holding a measuring rod and a line of flax. The man is made of bronze. His appearance is like bronze. And he spends 6 chapters measuring every single detail of a temple that doesn't exist yet. Who is this bronze man? Where did he come from? Why does he carry measurement tools? The church calls him an angel, but Ezekiel never calls him an angel. He calls him a man made of bronze, a man who appeared alongside the vehicle, a man who takes orders from the voice on the throne. This wasn't a single event. This was an ongoing operation with multiple personnel, coordinated missions, and long-term objectives. And here's the darkest implication. What if the reason God seemed absent from the exile was because God never showed up? What if Ezekiel encountered something else entirely? Something that knew the Hebrew people were vulnerable, desperate, and willing to believe any voice that offered them hope. If that story is gripping you, hit the like button right now. It helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more stories like this. Because what I'm about to tell you next is going to make you question everything you were taught in Sunday school. Let's talk about what Ezekiel saw in the temple. In chapter 8, the being grabs him by the hair and transports him to Jerusalem. Not in his body, he's clear about that. In the spirit, which means either he's having a vision or he's experiencing something we'd call remote viewing. The being shows him abominations happening inside the temple. Secret rituals, idol worship, women weeping for Tammuz. 25 men worshiping the sun with their backs to the sanctuary. But here's the detail everyone ignores. The being is furious, not disappointed, not saddened, furious. It shows Ezekiel each abomination and asks, "Do you see this? Do you see what they're doing?" Why would God need to show a human prophet what's happening in God's own house? Why would an omniscient being need confirmation from a witness? Unless the being itself didn't know. Unless it's gathering intelligence. Unless it's building a case. Then the being calls for the executioners. 6 men appear, each holding a weapon. They come from the direction of the upper gate facing north. One of them is dressed in linen and carries a writing kit. The being on the throne commands the man in linen to mark the foreheads of everyone in Jerusalem who grieves over the abominations. Then he gives the order to the other 6. Pass through the city after him and strike. Show no pity. Kill old men, young women, children, and infants, but do not touch anyone with the mark. They start at the sanctuary. Ezekiel watches them massacre the elders. The being tells them to defile the temple with corpses. Fill the courts with the slain. Go out and do the same to the city. This is in your Bible, chapter 9. Go read it yourself. An entity arrives in a vehicle, marks certain humans for protection, then commands a hit squad to exterminate everyone else. That's not divine judgment. That's a military operation. And it gets worse. While the killing is happening, the being commands the man in linen to go between the wheels under the cherubim, fill his hands with burning coals, and scatter them over the city. Ezekiel watches him do it. The cherubim pass the coals from hand to hand. The man takes them. The craft lifts off and hovers over the eastern gate. Then the man scatters fire over Jerusalem. That's an airstrike. Now, the church will tell you this is God's righteous anger against sin. They'll say the people deserved it. They'll say judgment is necessary and holy. But ask yourself, does this sound like the Jesus who said, "Let the children come to me"? Does this sound like the God who is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love? Does this sound like a being of infinite wisdom and compassion? Or does it sound like something else? Something territorial, something that demands absolute obedience and responds to resistance with overwhelming force. Ezekiel spends 20 years receiving transmissions from this entity. Every vision follows the same pattern. The craft appears, the being speaks, Ezekiel is given information or commands, the craft departs. It's structured, methodical, efficient. In chapter 37, the being takes him to a valley full of dry bones. Thousands of them, the remains of a slaughtered army. The being asks him, "Can these bones live?" Ezekiel says, "Lord God, you know." The being tells him to prophesy to the bones, speak to them, command them to live. Ezekiel does it, and the bones start rattling. They connect to each other. Flesh grows over them. Skin covers the flesh, but they have no breath. Then the being tells him to prophesy to the breath. Call it from the 4 winds. Breathe into these bodies. Ezekiel does it. The bodies stand up, an exceedingly great army. Read that again. An army. Not civilians, not families. An army. The being just had Ezekiel resurrect thousands of soldiers. Why? What for? The being explains, "These bones are the whole house of Israel. I will bring you back to the land and put my spirit in you, and you shall live." But notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say they'll have free will. It doesn't say they'll worship freely. It says, "I will put my spirit in you." That's programming. That's installing compliance. That's taking dead tissue and reanimating it under central control. Ezekiel never questions it. He's been conditioned over 2 decades to obey without asking why. He's seen what happens to people who resist. He's watched the executions. He's scattered the fire himself. He's become an asset. Here's what the church doesn't teach you. Ezekiel's encounters fit every single pattern of modern UFO abduction testimonies. Sudden appearance of craft, bright lights, paralysis, lost time, physical manipulation, downloaded information, commands to deliver messages, repeated contact over many years, physical evidence left behind. The only difference is that in 593 BC, you called it a vision from God. In 2025, you call it a close encounter. But the mechanics are identical. Joseph Blumrich wasn't the only engineer who studied Ezekiel. In the 1980s, a team at MIT analyzed the structural integrity of the temple Ezekiel describes in chapters 40 through 48. They built computer models based on his measurements. The temple design is impossible. The walls couldn't support the weight. The proportions don't allow for the functions Ezekiel describes. The whole structure would collapse under its own mass. Unless it wasn't meant to be built by humans. Unless it was a blueprint for something else. A facility, a processing center, a place where the marked ones would be gathered and the entity could maintain control over a reconstituted population. Ezekiel's final vision is the most revealing. He sees the being's glory return to the temple from the east. The entire structure fills with light. The being says, "This is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the people of Israel forever." The soles of my feet, the place where my feet touch the ground. Why would an omnipresent spirit need to specify where its feet go? Because it has a body, because it occupies physical space, because it's not infinite, it's just more advanced than anything Ezekiel's culture could comprehend. And here's the final horror. The being never promises to leave. It says, "I will dwell among the people of Israel forever." Forever. Permanent occupation, eternal surveillance, a throne that never becomes empty. Get ready, because from here on out, there's no going back. The implications are staggering. If Ezekiel didn't encounter God, then who wrote the rules? Who designed the sacrificial system? Who demanded the blood of bulls and goats and lambs? Who benefits from a population that's been trained to slaughter animals in ritual obedience? Look at the entire Old Testament through this lens. The pillar of fire by night, the cloud by day, the glory that filled the tabernacle so completely that Moses couldn't enter, the voice from the mercy seat between the cherubim. All descriptions of technology, all descriptions of a physical presence that required specific conditions, specific materials, specific protocols. The Ark of the Covenant was an electrical device, gold inside and out, separated by acacia wood. That's a capacitor. The cherubim on top were conductive terminals. When the priests carried it with poles inserted through rings, they were handling a charged object at a safe distance. Uzzah touched the ark to steady it. He died instantly. 2 Samuel 6:7. Struck down for irreverence, the text says, but the symptoms match electrocution, sudden death, no visible injury, terror from the witnesses. The being gave explicit instructions about how to build the ark, how to transport it, how to approach it. Why? Because it knew exactly what would happen if you handled it wrong. Because it needed the ark functional, and the priests terrified enough to follow procedures exactly. This is what they did to us. They took our ancestors' desperation and weaponized it. They took our need for meaning and built a control system around it. They gave us laws we could never perfectly follow, then demanded blood when we failed. And they called it love. They called it covenant. They called it relationship with the divine. But what kind of relationship requires this much fear? What kind of love demands this much sacrifice? What kind of God needs this much control? Ezekiel died in Babylon, never seeing the return to Jerusalem. The exiles went back in 538 BC under Persian rule. They rebuilt the temple. They reinstituted the sacrifices. They taught their children the same laws, the same rituals, the same story. The story of a God who rides in glory demands absolute obedience and punishes resistance with fire from heaven. But some of them remembered. Some of them passed down whispers of doubt. Some of them asked the questions that weren't allowed in public. And 600 years later, a Galilean rabbi stood in that temple and said something that should have been obvious all along. "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Jesus didn't just reform Judaism. He rejected the entire premise. He said the God of love doesn't demand sacrifice. He said the kingdom isn't coming on a throne with wheels of fire. He said the violent take it by force. But he came with different news. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Forgive 70 times 7. Let the children come. The last shall be first. That's not the voice on Ezekiel's throne. That's not the being who commanded the slaughter of Jerusalem. That's not the entity who said, "Show no pity." That's something else. Something that opposed the system. Something that threatened the control. And they killed him for it. The same system Ezekiel served, the same priesthood that maintained the rituals, the same power structure that needed the people afraid and obedient. They killed him because he was dangerous, because he told people they didn't need the vehicle or the voice or the throne. They just needed each other and love and the courage to stop sacrificing in fear and start living in freedom. Ezekiel never knew that. He died believing the being in the vehicle was the Most High. He died waiting for the restoration that never came the way he was promised. But we know. Because we have the whole story now. Because we can read the blueprint and see the machine underneath. The question is, what do we do with this knowledge? Do we keep pretending the vehicle was a vision and the voice was God? Do we keep teaching our children to fear the throne and obey the commands? Do we keep the system running because it's easier than facing what it really was? Or do we finally admit that what landed on the Kebar River in 593 BC was never divine at all? That it was something else, something powerful, something that knew exactly how to exploit a broken people's desperate need to believe they hadn't been abandoned. Something that's still in our texts, still in our theology, still in our churches, still demanding sacrifice, still requiring blood, still sitting on the throne we built for it. If you've made it this far, you're part of a rare group of people who can handle the truth without flinching. You're willing to question, willing to look at the evidence, willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, we've been worshiping the wrong thing this whole time. The Bible isn't what they told you it was. It's not a simple story of God and humanity. It's a record of contact, a testimony of encounters, a documentation of what happened when something from somewhere else decided Earth was theirs to control. And some humans said yes, and some humans said no. And the ones who said no were called prophets or messiahs or revolutionaries, depending on how much danger they posed to the system. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I bring you the stories they don't want you to know, the parts of the Bible they edited out, the history they whitewashed, the truth they buried under 2,000 years of theology. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Ezekiel saw God or something pretending to be God? Do you think the church has been lying to us or just repeating a lie they inherited? I read every comment, every question, every challenge, because this conversation matters. Because once you see the machine, you can't unsee it. Next video, I'm breaking down what really happened at Mount Sinai. The fire, the smoke, the mountain that trembled, the people who died for getting too close. You think Ezekiel's vision was disturbing? Wait until you see what Moses met on that mountain. Until then.